All right, great. We're gonna get started here. So thank you everyone for coming out here today. Let's first start by talking about two different construction businesses. The first, let's say, is a family-owned general contractor. They've been around for, let's say, 20 years, maybe 30 to 50 employees. And what they do is primarily commercial tenant improvements, small industrial builds, facility renovations, projects in the 100K to maybe a couple $1 million range. In terms of team, they've got a tight-knit team, maybe a controller, a couple project managers, maybe an estimator or two, and office admin that holds it all together. And when we look at their system, it's probably a mix of QuickBooks, Excel spreadsheets, a shared drive with thousands of files, and a lot of information that just lives in people's brains. Now, the second business I want to talk about here is, let's say, a mid to large size general contractor, maybe a specialty contractor, think 200 or 500 or more employees, and they're working on major commercial, institutional, or mixed use projects. And so these are talking more in the range of the 20 or 50 or maybe $100 million plus jobs. And so they have dedicated finance teams, project management teams. They've got a lot of projects on the go, and they've already invested in some technology. Maybe they're using Procore, maybe Sage, but behind the scenes, they still have a lot of back office processes that are stitched together with emails and PDFs and manual data entry because their systems don't talk nicely together. So, what do these two businesses have in common? Well, it's not their team size or the projects they work on, but it's the paper-based legacy way of working. They've been working the same way for, pretty much the last 20 years, and they're still running their business like it's the early 2000s. But why? Why is this the case for these two hypothetical businesses and many real ones that we speak to every single day? For the small one, you might think, well, they haven't had the time or capacity to take on digitizing their operations more, automating, streamlining their workflows. So that's one thing. On the big side, you might think that maybe they haven't done this because these transformation projects can be very heavyweight and they can take a long time. And maybe they've already tried this and they failed partially or fully. And so there's a bad taste in people's mouth. And so really, that is kind of the issue that we've seen stopping organizations from fixing this way of work and continuing to work the way they have been. But this doesn't have to be the case today. It was definitely tough to modernize operations, and it still does take some effort today, but it is significantly easier with all the great AI automation solutions that we have available to us today. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. How you can take the unoptimized, unautomated parts of your operations that are dragging your business down and how to turn them into strategic advantages. And when I say strategic advantages, I mean things that will help you win more business, reduce overhead costs, and get ahead of your competitors. And I truly believe that you can gain strategic advantages through this. We talk to many construction companies every week, and what we see is that many of them are not even thinking about automating operations, let alone thinking about getting the value that they could from AI. And so if you can get your team on top of it, you'll be leading the pack and positioning your business well for the future. But before I go on, who am I and why should you keep listening? Well, I'm the VP of Platform and Operations at Simply Ask AI. I work with our clients to help them adopt proven practical AI automation, and I do this while leading the development of our award-winning AI platform, Symphona. So what are we going to talk about for the rest of today? Well, we're going to look at what are the problems we're actually trying to solve for. So we talked about paperwork, that's an issue, but why? So let's go a little bit deeper into that. We're going to look at some proven AI automation use cases that we see deployed quite frequently. Then we're going to look at why they're actually good use cases and how you can find other ones. And then we'll see at the end what all of this looks like in action and how you can take practical next steps to get started. So the problem. So we talked about a little bit earlier there where the problem that companies are facing often is that they have mountains of paperwork, but the question is, what is the actual cost or the impact of that? And so I like to say that manual work is the hidden tax, because oftentimes we find that we don't quantify, all of these different manual steps that we're doing, data entry, waiting for follow-ups, missing documentation. These are things that we know are problems, but we don't normally quantify in terms of actual costs. And that's because a lot of those actual costs do end up getting hidden. So we have things where we have people being less productive because they're having to switch context more, they're having to do more follow-ups, so they're not working on valuable tasks. They're looking up information and again, slowing them down and allowing them to have less capacity. And so these are the types of things that are creating a tangible cost on your operations, but may not necessarily be quantified or measured yet today. But you can definitely quantify it, you can definitely measure it. And when you start looking at these numbers here, they really start to add up. So the question is, how do you get started? As I mentioned, we have a handful of proven use cases that we want to talk about here. And what we'll start with is for AI invoice triage. And so we find this to be quite valuable both for finance teams and for project management teams. Some companies we work with, the project managers are actually involved quite heavily in terms of processing all of the invoices from their subs. With other companies, that falls directly on finance. But regardless of where you are, hopefully this should illustrate a little bit about a practical use case that you could deploy. And the idea here is that with invoice processing, you end up getting generally a high volume of them. And as they're coming through, it's taking a lot of time to go through the paperwork to validate that they're actually correct, to update information in your different tracking systems, and then to notify the right people to actually action these invoices. And so oftentimes today we see that teams are getting invoices sent in to a shared email inbox, or maybe they're still even getting fax them. And this is just being kind of put in a pile, and then someone works on them as they're able to get to them. And so this obviously comes with a lot of issues that we see around, invoices getting lost, or processing times being long, or in general, just taking a lot of effort away from your team members that could be working on more valuable tasks and looking at data entry, doing validation, and all of that. So when we're talking about a solution that could help solve that kind of cluster of issues, we find a solution like this. And we'll go over and see all of these in action a little bit later on in the presentation here. But just to start at the conceptual level, we have a solution where maybe you have a received email that comes in, maybe it's a fax that comes in, maybe it's a physical piece of paper that you end up scanning. But you have invoices that come in, and then those can trigger some sort of automation. And in that automation, what it could do is it can use AI to analyze and determine the nature of the invoice that's coming in. It can extract all of the information that's on the invoice, and it can go ahead and do validation. So it can check that this vendor is actually valid, the amount is correct and it matches contracts, and any other type of validation that you might be doing manually today. And once that's all good, it can create a manual task for your team members to go in to review the invoice payment, check that it's all correct, and then notify your team that it's ready basically for their approval. We see some teams go all the way to the automation side, where then after it passes all of the validation checks, they don't actually have a human in the loop for approval. But oftentimes we see that teams want to have that human touch in there, and we always recommend that where it makes sense. And really what we're looking at here at solving is that this just helps you be a lot more efficient, where the human step is really just on the approval, maybe for the edge case or the exception to look deeper into it. And your team can work on more valuable tasks instead of having just to do text and document entry all day. Now, switching gears here, another interesting use case we find, and this is more on the project management side, is around AI RFP response generation. And the idea is that all of your businesses have submitted many RFPs in the past for different types of projects. And what you can do with this is that you can build a knowledge base of your past RFP submissions, guidelines that you follow generally internally about how you generate RFPs, the format, the style, the content. And you can use that so that AI can generate first passes of these RFPs, draft them so they're ready. So you just need to do some red lines, and then you're ready to submit it. And so, really, the problem we're trying to solve here is that oftentimes a lot of these RFPs are going to be fairly standard in terms of the contents. And when you can layer on AI with your past submissions, as well as its ability to understand and read drawings and specifications and notes that you have about the new project, it can combine all that information and generate a high quality draft of the RFP response. And so this is actually, in fact, even something that we use internally. And I can say it definitely saves a lot of time. So just to go a little bit deeper of what that means, if you provide the solution, all of your project documents, maybe the initial directions or thoughts you have on the project, then this can be fed into this structured process where it can use AI to really deeply analyze the project scope, extract all the key information out of it. It could then go and start drafting template responses. It would do this iteratively and work for a while, and eventually come back to you with a final draft that I believe is high confidence. And at that point, if you wanted to kind of go back and forward with it, give it feedback, have it regenerate, you could do that here. Now, the idea is that by having a structured process like this, you're able to ensure that whenever it generates an RFP response, it's following a standard format. So, of course, you could go to ChatGPT and you could say, generate me an RFP draft based on these couple past responses. But the idea here is that you could take hundreds or thousands of past responses that you've done and enable the AI to basically selectively pick and choose parts of past responses in order to reference to generate a new one. And so really what that allows you to do is to generate a much higher quality response with this kind of structured flow instead of just kind of sending a simple message to ChatGPT, for example. Moving on to a different use case that we see come up quite often is around AI for documentation auditing. And so this is quite broad. We see it used across safety, finance, projects. And the idea is that with AI, you can flag gaps or expirations or inconsistencies between large documentation sets. And then you can generate reports that then enable you to remediate or automatically remediate the issues that are identified. Now, to give you a concrete example of this, we were working with one company and they had a project safety documentation set where in one document, it said if a unexploded explosive doesn't go off, then you need to wait an hour. Another document said you should wait 10 minutes. These are things that would be actually hard to catch as a human, because imagine reviewing hundreds or thousands of documents, checking every single line to make sure that there's no conflicts. This is something that AI is actually great at doing, and it can do the superhuman. And so by having it compare these hundreds of documents, it identified that one kind of inconsistency was found in one line of this one document and another line of this other document. And it generated a report saying that here are the problems. And so this business actually had no idea they had this documentation. And so that becomes a whole set of issues if something were to go wrong. Of course, both people could get injured. And then, of course, there's also the negligence and the legal side of all that by having poor documentation. But again, safety is just one example. This can also be used in finance. Maybe you want to audit contracts and make sure that payments are being issued correctly against the contracts. There's other things too, where maybe you want to check, project reports automatically and make sure that they're aligning with the project plans. And so these are all different things that you can use AI to very deeply analyze and compare these large sets of documents where, again, doing this human manually would result in potential errors or just would be impossible because it takes so much effort that you just don't have the people to even do these types of audits. And that's actually something we see more often than not. Now, talking about a different type of use case here, now we're talking more about general work acceleration. And so if you've used tools like ChatGPT before and you chat with it and you know ask it maybe to write an email for you or something like that, we're talking about that concept, but taken one or two steps further. And the idea is that you can create these AI agents that your team members, or as a customer here, but can be your internal team members, it could be external people, can chat with in order to find information across all of your company's documentation. But more interestingly, it can also perform tasks by itself autonomously. And then you can also add in, you know, layers to open requests for humans. And so the idea is that if you have questions, maybe procedural questions, or maybe you want to look up, you know, find me similar RFP responses we did about this topic, and then you can have it automatically retrieve and find you, you know, top 5 results, for example. That's something you can do. You can do this kind of Q&A across all of your company knowledge base. But what you can also do is have it perform actions. So maybe you want it to do updates across multiple systems at once, where you want it to create a project note for whatever project note you want, but then you want that updated across maybe 3 different trackers that you have. And so instead of manually going ahead and doing that, you can just conversationally kind of chat with your agent, and it can go ahead and perform those actions for you. Again, really the key idea here is just helping your team members be more efficient, reduce data entry, and really just enable better collaboration across the organization. Now, those 4 use cases I went through are definitely not the end. You know, we've seen hundreds of different use cases across project management, across finance, across other departments. I touched lightly on safety and so on. But what we should really talk about now is what makes those good use cases, because those are 4, and we also have, you know, hundreds of others that we've seen, but there's also things that we find to be unique to organizations in the way that they work. And so, you know, what makes a good workflow or a good regular task you're doing today to be great for AI and automation? Now, you've probably seen, you know, lots of claims about what AI can do for your business. And so, you know, some of them are from it can do everything for you and you can just go on vacation, to, you know, it's not going to do that much for you. What we're really looking for in general is that if work is repetitive and, you know, these general steps are written down somewhere or known by someone, then usually AI can help accelerate those tasks. And so when we're looking at good AI candidates, we're really looking for these types of attributes where you have some sort of high volume repetitive task. So if we think back to the use cases I was just talking about, invoice processing, that's generally a high volume and a fairly repetitive process where you're validating invoices and you're getting them ready for payment. And so that's a good candidate here. Text and document heavy is generally a good signal where, you know, if you're doing data entry, you're reading from documents and you're entering into different systems. Again, invoice processing is a great example of that. Other things like, you know, questions where you're asking, where's the latest report on this, or find me, you know, the past 5 RFPs that we did on this topic. These are great use cases for that knowledge or information retrieval I was talking about earlier. Other types of processes where you have a standard policy or a template, you know, maybe you're generating RFPs with a general kind of standard procedure and a template. Again, that falls into this bucket of being a good signal. And if you, oftentimes we find good AI automation use cases have the ability to put a human approval step easily in the loop. And the idea there is that oftentimes you don't want a fully automated process. You just want some of those tedious tasks accelerated, and then humans are still in the loop as well to keep everything running on track. Now, these signals, you don't need all these signals in order to have a good use case. It may be a handful of them. These are just general kind of guiding points. But in our experience, these qualities make up good qualities of things that you can automate with AI. Now, equally important, here's when not to use AI. So, for example, if you have no policy about how to code invoices. Your team disagrees. You don't really want AI inventing that governance. So, this often happens sometimes where you have an organization where one guy or a small team knows how the process works, but no one else does. You'll want to map that out, come to some sort of internal agreement about what the standard process should be. And once you have that, then you'll be ready for AI automation. So this is actually probably the biggest issue that we see for organizations. Now, there are other things here too. Maybe the decision is high stakes and ambiguous. And so you want to still keep a human in the loop in order to make a strategic decision. That's something where you may not want to automate. Other things here too, if the data is missing or unreliable, that's an issue. So for example, we were talking to a client and they're saying that they have a office full of contracts that they want to go ahead and digitize so that they can easily query them. And so the problem is that they haven't digitized them yet. They're all just sitting in paper in filing cabinets behind them. And that means the data is missing. It's not ready for AI. And so once they digitize it, of course, then you can apply AI on top and you can use them as you want. But until you have that digitized, it's a little bit of an issue to add any layer of automation on top of it. And the last thing here is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So if you already have a simple template and automation that's working well for you, no need to overcomplicate things. You can probably just keep on using that. So oftentimes we say, don't replace what's not broken, with the caveat that if it's not broken and poorly performing, probably should replace it. But if it's performing well, it's not broken, you can probably leave that alone. So the question is, what do we target first? Well, what we want to look at here is your high potential, low risk use cases. And so when you think about your organization and what you do every single day, you may think about, those handful of use cases I shared earlier. You might go through the process of identifying what are good AI use cases based on the qualities that I mentioned earlier. But once you do that, you'll be able to start categorizing the tasks that you do on an everyday basis into high potential and low risk. And what I mean by high potential is that it has lots of those qualities, good qualities that make them ripe for AI automation. And so, those might be high volume processes that are documented and the steps are known. And, maybe it's simple tasks like data entry. And it's low risk because maybe there's no ambiguous decisions and it's something that does make sense for automation. And so when we're looking at figuring out where to get started, it's always within this high potential, low risk quadrant. Now, let's talk about the patterns that make these processes easily automatable across your different departments. And what we'll go into after this is actually seeing it all in action. Now, oftentimes when we're working with clients, we're thinking about this pattern of using AI agents for having more conversational support, having process automation, which is going to run in the background on a regular basis, or maybe is triggered by a conversation with an AI agent. And then having human tasks in the loop as well, because more often than not, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to keep a human in the loop, maybe for approvals, maybe to hand off part of the task. But the idea here is how to accelerate the parts of your workflows that are acceleratable. And so when we're looking at this, we're often seeing these kind of components within solutions where maybe you're capturing or you're creating requests based on events. So maybe an email comes in and you want some automation to happen. Maybe you have a user, a team member who's going to chat with their AI agent, and that's going to trigger some automation. Maybe you want to have a vendor fill in a form on your website, and then when they click submit, you want that to trigger some sort of automation. But the idea is that you can create these events that you can start automating. These are like your starting events in your workflows. Now, other good qualities are then, once you get those events, then triggering request fulfillment. And so the idea is that maybe coming back to a form, you have a form that's filled in for a vendor for vendor onboarding. Then you can have it connect to your digital systems and do maybe validation to check, does that vendor exist already? Have they provided me the correct data to add that vendor to your vendor management system? Different things like that. You can do other things as well. Maybe you want to have AI analyze information. So if we think back to the invoice processing, we had an email come in, that was an event, and then we're using AI to categorize and classify the email, to extract content from the invoice that was in the email, and to analyze if it met all of the validation criteria. Or you can do other things too, like creating a manual task. So again, thinking back to invoice processing, when that email came in with the invoice, we went ahead and we created a manual task at the end for final approval, and then routed that to the right person to give that approval. And then there's other tasks too, where you're looking at accelerating more of the on-demand tasks that you do throughout the day. And so that might be finding information or generating draft materials. And so that often is done through chatting with your AI agent or your co-pilot. And so also we talked about that a bit, about those general AI agents. Now, the last important ingredient that we see for useful and valuable AI automation solutions is actually to be able to log your outcomes, measure value, and scale. Because if you don't measure how your team was working before and how it's working after, you're not going to actually be able to quantify the benefits. And so there's definitely benefits, but if you don't measure it, it's going to be hard to actually show benefits from it, of course. Seems obvious, but we see this happen with teams as well. Okay, so let's spend about 5 or 10 minutes or so looking at how this all works in action. And so the idea is we'll go through seeing how those 4 or so use cases work step by step. We'll see how you can easily get started with this. And then we'll also talk a little bit about how you can monitor and actually see behind the scenes about how everything's working and how you keep control over your AI to reduce any risk that you might have from it. So let me stop sharing here, and I will share a different window. And we'll get started over here. Okay, great. So where we're going to get started here is about an AI RFP response review process. And so this is actually related to the RFP response generation, just a little bit different, same concept. The idea with the RFP generation is that you have the AI generate a first pass of your RFP. What we're looking at here is going to be what happens when maybe a human drafts the RFP from the start or maybe makes some edits, and you can pass it back to the AI and have it analyze and provide a report on the RFP that you have generated here. So same idea, just slightly different application. And we see these kind of used hand in hand. So what's happening here is that the user is chatting with the AI, and they're providing the link to their RFP document and the package of information. And after some time, it'll send them an email with their report. And so we can see here that it's completed the report on this RFP. It's found some issues and missing elements. And so we'll see here that, it looks like that they missed a key requirement about a load-bearing wall. And so it points this out to them and gives them recommendation how to remediate. And this goes on for all of the different issues that's found. Now, another use case that we were talking about is finding information from across your organization. And so in this case here, we're looking at it from more of a safety lens, which is going to be about finding safety documentation. But again, it could also be looking at all of the past RFPs, for example, that you had generated, and you want to look at, have we done any projects in this area before? In this case here, we're looking for safety information, and what we're getting back is exact snippets of information, page number, where to find them, what the document is named. And you can even go one step further, or maybe you want it to generate some report on it, or do whatever else you want. In that case, we're just showing a simple format. Now, switching gears here to invoice triage. So we talked about the invoice processing automation. We'll see this in action here, what I'm going to do is we're going to end up sending an email, and that's going to have the invoice in it. And what's going to end up happening is our system's going to receive it, and it's going to start going through that automation workflow. And we'll see that a new invoice triage has been started. And we can actually see also in our logs here that it's gone through a bunch of steps. It sent an acknowledgement email to the person who sent the invoice saying, we received your invoice, we'll process it soon. It's opened up a service ticket within our platform, Symfona, so that you can track the manual task and the work that needs to be done. So it doesn't just get lost. It's not just a pile of paper in the corner of your office. We're using AI there to classify the email. And then based on the classification, either if it's an invoice or if it's something else, then it's going to go and do some steps. And so what's actually done right now is that it's gone to the approve invoice task. And so in that case, it's now waiting for approval before it goes through all of the later steps. And we can also see the information here about, the subject line and the email information that we had just sent earlier. Now, if we go ahead and we check it out, we'll see that we've got an acknowledgement email that will reply as soon as possible. That's what we expected. And we'll also see that we have a manual task now opened up. And so in this manual task, it has the email contents, and we can see that we have the invoice as well that we had attached to our email. And then we also see some other things like the name and the email address associated. Now, as I mentioned, there's an approval step. It's waiting for approval. We're just going to approve it here. And when we go ahead and approve it, then it's going to enable the processing to continue on. And what it will do at that point is, maybe directly connect to the bank and issue payment that way, or go ahead and send it to the right person to do the final payment process. Now, looking at the support AI from a different angle, this is on the property management kind of use case point of view. But the idea here is that these AI agents can do more than just provide answers from a knowledge base, but they can also perform actions. And so in our case here, we're asking to book an amenity. It's going to collect information. It's going to go back and forward. And it's actually going to go ahead and connect to the right systems and book the amenity on the behalf of the user. Now, of course, not directly construction, but the idea is quite general, which is that you're not only going ahead and looking up information, but you're also getting the AI to perform actions on your behalf, so you don't have to navigate all these different systems. And that becomes really valuable when maybe you're doing updates across 2 or 3 or more different systems, and you can just do it all in one place. Now, looking a little bit behind the curtain of how this all works, in our platform here, Symfona, you can set up these conversational experiences. Think of the documentation search agent that we're looking at, or maybe that last property management use case. You can set them all up by just configuring in English objectives. And the idea being, what are the actions you want it to do, and how can it do it? And so in our case here, we have it searching a construction safety knowledge base, and we've actually given it rules about how to respond. And so in our case here, we're telling it, give an exact snippet, document name, page number, and all this is configurable by adding or removing content from this set of instructions. The other idea here is that you can add other actions. So as I mentioned, you're doing more than just searching up and providing a Q&A experience, but you can also connect to your other systems. And so that's all done over here too. And we also have, for example, a process set up here where if there's an issue with the documentation, someone can submit a request and that will go to the operations team. Again, all this is configurable based on your use case. And the other thing to note is that oftentimes teams we work with don't even go into these editors, because we provide these out-of-the-box solutions that have all of this configured already for you, and you just need to basically turn it on. But you do have access to all these editors here, and so that's why we're taking a bit of a look here. Now, I talked a bit about knowledge bases. A knowledge base could be anything. It could be files that you upload, hundreds or thousands of files. It could be a website that you crawl, maybe have an internal documentation portal on SharePoint, for example. But the idea is that you're able to put information wherever it is into your knowledge base and use that within your automated conversations, your Copilot agent conversations, but also you're able to use it when you're processing and using AI within workflows. And so what we're actually looking at here in the editor is that whole workflow that our invoice went through earlier, where it's going to first send an acknowledgement email, it's going to open up a manual task to track it, or a service ticket. It's going to classify it with AI, and then it's going to do some more steps. And so all this is configured just in these editors here where you just describe what you want to do. But again, the key point is that you often would likely not go into these editors at all, just because these solutions are ready to be kind of turned on in any environment. They're pre-configured, but if you want to make any edits, all of it here is just done in this kind of no-code, business-friendly environment here. And then the last thing that we'll wrap up on, we'll be talking a little bit more about how we monitor it. But just lastly, I suppose to wrap up here is just, you've got a bunch of different steps. You can do anything with it. Now, when looking at how you monitor it, you have full logs. So if you want to see how your employees are chatting and using the AI, you can do that by just looking in the logs here. Or maybe you want to see when a process is executed, what happens. So maybe an invoice comes in. We saw this a little bit earlier, but you have full logs as well to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And oftentimes we find, when organizations set this all up, they set it up once and they never actually even have to go into these logs. It kind of just runs in the background, and they don't need to even go there. So to finish up here, what we're going to do is go back to the slides I had pulled up earlier. And we'll wrap up with this. So if there's only one thing you take away from this presentation, it's definitely to think about those most high potential and low risk use cases. And again, how you do that is to quantify, those good signals for what makes a good AI use case against the bad signals. And so when you're looking at your high potential and most low risk ones, you're really looking for the ones with those most high potential signals for AI. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've seen hundreds and have hundreds of proven AI automation use cases for construction. And so we showed you 4 today. We showed pretty much those 4 within the demo, very quick demo earlier. But you don't need to rethink about how to build out all these things. There are often solutions that already exist out there that can be turned on in days. So we're not talking about month-long projects here. So if you're interested, feel free to scan the QR code and set up a free consultation with our team. And we'd be happy to talk about what your business looks like today and see if we have any solutions that already fit your needs, or if there's something custom required. But as I mentioned, more often than not, we've seen a lot of solutions and we already have them in our library. And it might just be as easy as turning it on and making your life a whole lot easier. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Now, we also have some time for questions. So if there are any questions, feel free to put those into the chat now, and we'll field those. Okay, I see one question here. So is the RFP generation separate from the RFP review automation? Okay, so that's a good question. No, I mean, they are separate, but they are related. And these are, 2, I'd say, standard project management solutions that we deploy for people all the time. And the idea is that, you have one experience for chatting with that AI agent. We saw in the demo there that, you kind of give it the link of your document, and then you would go ahead and have it review the RFP you've already generated for the review process. That can be set up so that you have kind of one chat experience where you can chat with your agent, and you can have it both kind of trigger that first generation and then go back and forward with it and have it continuously also review what's been generated. So you can use them separately, but more often than not, we actually see teams using it together because it really kind of streamlines your RFP generation process. Okay, question about the presentation. Yes, the recording will be made available for sure. We'll send that out afterwards. Okay, another question. You mentioned there are hundreds of use cases that can be automated in construction aside from the ones mentioned here. What other come to mind? Okay, so that's a big question. As I mentioned, there are many across different departments. So we talked actually a little bit getting outside of project management and finance into the safety area. There's a lot around there in terms of auditing safety documentation, ensuring that subcontractor insurance policies, for example, match your requirements, especially if you're onboarding a bunch of subs or have a lot of them active at a single time. But really, I think what it comes down to across the board is that if you have repetitive tasks, think of document creation. RFPs are a good example. Or think of follow-ups that you're doing frequently. Or think about processes where you're extracting information often, like from invoices. These are all kind of good categories, and we have a range of solutions. So for sure, if you want to learn more about a specific area you have in mind, feel free to reach out to us, and we can definitely dive deeper into that. Okay, give an outline of the cost of the solution. Depends on the use, but you can give a general outline of costing. So is it by use or is it by project, and so on? So that's a good question. Generally, pricing is based on usage. And so that's going to be, pretty much, you can think of it, how much automation you're doing kind of scales with the cost. You are right, it does depend on the use case. So, it could scale from a couple $100s a month to a couple thousand. It really just depends on, I guess, how broadly you're using it and how much kind of automation you're doing. If you're processing thousands of invoices a month, it's going to cost more than if you're processing 10 or 50. But regardless, there's definitely good value, I would say, from using automation to accelerate those tasks, and the cost is way below what you're saving out of it. Okay, what are the steps to get going with some of the solutions you showed today? So as I mentioned, if you want to get started at all, feel free to scan the QR code over there, and we'd be happy just to chat, learn a little bit more about your business, what you're doing today, and then figure out, how to plug all these things together and accelerate your processes here. Okay, another question. Lots of construction teams use legacy tools or Procore setups. How are these automated workflows on top of those systems without requiring a massive migration? Yeah, that's a great point. So a lot of the times in the construction industry, we find that a lot of vendors are pushing, automation AI, but the caveat is that you need to move to their platform. And so that is obviously a huge endeavor, especially if we're talking about like a project management platform or a finance management platform. And so the great value of some of the solutions we showed you today is that these are sitting on top of all the existing tools you have and really helping you unlock more value from the tools that you already pay for and the ways that you already work. And so Symfona, how it would work is that it can connect into your existing tools. It can, still have those human tasks. And the idea is that it's just sitting on top of everything. It's connecting as needed so that you don't need to replace the tools that you're already using today. Okay, great. Those were some good questions there. Is there anything else that people are wondering about? Okay, I see another one coming in here. If we're able to successfully automate some of these workflows, what should project managers do with those reclaimed hours to actually improve project outcomes? Okay, so it's interesting because I would say a lot of the automation that you can build um, do directly improve project outcomes themselves. And so, for example, if you want to build out automated follow-ups, or if you want to build out, auditing processes, these are things that can directly improve outcomes themselves. Because if you're doing an automated follow-up, then you can ideally get information back more promptly, and it's not putting that overhead on your project managers themselves. If you're auditing documentation, then these are things that can reduce human error, which should also improve project outcomes. But in terms of the free time, that allows you to focus more on kind of the more complex tasks. And so that might be being able to focus more on the stakeholder management and other areas of the project that can allow you to create more value, and as a result, deliver better project outcomes. Okay. And how do you handle the human element? For example, how do you get field teams to trust an automated process in the use to manual oversight? Okay, that's a great question. We see this come up actually quite a bit when we're talking about safety, because that oftentimes is the most um, important area to start applying AI to make information more readily accessible, and of course touches a lot of people working in the field. There definitely is. A resilience, I would say, for people working in the field in terms of adopting these new types of technologies and new ways of working. Now, really, I think what is required is to help educate your team members. And so oftentimes we would see that this is going to be used more by the supervisors who are actually on site. And so educating them in terms of, why this is beneficial, why it's important, and not just throwing a tool at people. And so that kind of talks more towards the practical change management side. It's nothing really to say about the technology. But of course, whenever you deploy any type of new tooling, you want to make sure that you follow some level of change management processes. And so that's also something that we help advise on as part of deploying any of these pre-built solutions that we have for organizations. Okay, great. Well, I think we're all done here. So thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us this morning and this afternoon. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.